Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome to Synth Stuff. In this series, we talk about all my synthesizer collections, starting with the simplest synthesizer and working our way up to the most complex. We've gone through the Yamaha Reface CS, the Roland GDXi, Korg NTS1, the Roland SH01 Gaia, and the Roland System 8. Today, Episode 6, the Modal Cobalt8. Coming up next. I have to admit, Modal was not even on my radar originally. They're almost a boutique manufacturer out of England. They're a small company. They made a couple really expensive exotic synths, the Modal 001, very capable digital synths. More recently, they came out with a small form factor Sculpt, and I've not really been a fan of these, not because of how they sound, but because of their appearance and workflow. I mean, looking at the Sculpt, the user interface on this is horrendous. I mean, how do you figure out what button does what? And there's tiny little labels, which way do they face, and it's something that really turned me off about Modal. And when they came out with their Argon 8 wavetable synth, yes, it sounded good, but the user interface, again, lots of dials and buttons with tiny little print, hard to read. It seemed to me more form over function. Plus, I already had my ASM Hydrosynth, which is an extremely powerful and capable wavetable synth. So I didn't really, the Argon didn't really vibe with me. Then they came out with the Cobalt8, which is their virtual analog synthesizer. Again, all digital and almost exactly the same form factor as the Argon. In fact, the button and dial layout is identical. It looks like they use the same front panel for both synths, obviously a cost-saving measure, but interesting innovation. Lots of encoders, lots of tiny print, but again, not on my radar. I already have a couple virtual analog synths. The System 8 for one, the Gaia SH01, Reface CS, all very capable virtual analog synths, so why would I need another one? And then I went to Sweetwater again, this time to check out their brand new store. They have this massive showroom where you can go in and get hands-on with all the different synthesizers, well, instruments of any kind, but synthesizers most importantly, that they sell. And while I was there, I actually took a video. I'll link to that video in the description here, because I actually try out 75 different synthesizers in that video. I had quite a few preconceptions when I went there as to which synths I was going to really like, and I actually wanted to buy, and I was just going to go try them out to make sure that I liked them. And I was actually surprised because quite a few of those synths that I thought I was going to love and just wanted to try out before I bought, I turned out thinking, actually, I'm not really that interested in that synth. The Access Virus being one of them. I thought I would just love that synth, but I was really underwhelmed. And then there was the other side of things, synths that were totally not on my radar that I tried, and I thought, oh, I have to have this. And the Modal Cobalt8 was one of those. I tried it out, and the sound just blew me away. The Keybed was gorgeous. The feel, the synth just blew me away. I thought, I have to have one of these. They came out with the original 37 key version, same as they did with the Argon. Then they came out with the Cobalt8M, which is the module with no keyboard at all. And then the Cobalt8X with the 61 key keybed, and that's the one that got me to click buy. Especially with an 8-voice synthesizer like this, 37 keys just isn't enough. 37 keys is never the greatest. Hello, Korg, Wavestate, especially when you have a synthesizer that's so capable that you can use that keyboard. Again, Korg, Wavestate, multi-timbral, 4 sounds crammed into 37 keys, come on. So I don't like the small keybeds. I always try to get the larger ones if at all possible, which is why the Modal8X spoke to me. So let's look at the Cobalt8X. All right, the very first thing that I noticed when I walked up and tried out the Cobalt8 is the keybed. I've got lots of synths with lots of different types of keybeds and lots of different quality keybeds. The MODALapp, System 8, they have usable keybeds. The Summit, much nicer keybed. The JDXi, worst, most miserable excuse for a keybed ever made and attached to a synthesizer. The Hydrosynth, which was long my favorite keybed. The Polytouch on the Hydrosynth is by far the best I've ever used on any synth. But in terms of just overall feel, nothing beats this gorgeous Fatar keyboard on the Modal Cobalt8. It just has the perfect balance of feel, springiness, and it just is a beautiful feeling key bed. It does have aftertouch. The aftertouch is a bit stiff for me. It definitely is nowhere near as good as the aftertouch on the Hydrasynth. The Hydrasynth is just unsurpassed in terms of aftertouch. So it's a delight to play. You can play it quickly, you can play it slowly. The keys are the right size, the right amount of springiness. A beautiful keyboard, and having the 61 keys on here means that you can use this as a controller. Historically, I've always used my Hydrasynth as a controller because of the polytouch. However, I found myself using the Cobalt8X as a controller for my soft synths more and more often just because I like the feel of it. The enclosure, nice sturdy enclosure, aluminum top panel in this beautiful cobalt that's extremely hard to light for videography and photography. The chassis itself is plastic, the top is aluminum, so it has a really beautiful, nice quality feel to it. It's not too heavy, so it's fairly portable, you can move it around. Something that's very different with modal synths than any other synth, every single controller on here, including the volume controller, is an infinite rotary controller. They're not potentiometers, so you can just keep spinning and spinning. You can see the main volume changes. I'm up 127 here, and if I scroll it, if I twist it down, it goes down to 0. So what's the benefit of that? Well, first off, your potentiometers don't get noisy and scratchy because there aren't any potentiometers, they're just digital encoders. But for things like cutoff, let's say we have a cutoff set to a certain amount, and then you change patches. And the new patch you're using has a different cutoff value. Well, how do you reflect that if it's just a potentiometer? You know, on synths like the Roland System 8, there's two different ways you can do that potentiometer. One is that when you twist the potentiometer, it jumps to whatever the value is, so you lose what the value used to be. And that's how most synths work. You just twist it and it jumps to the new value. There are some where you can set it so that when you twist the knob, it actually doesn't take effect until you get to the current setting for that patch, and then you can start adjusting it. So there's a dead zone before you get there. On synths like the System 8, you can press Shift and twist the knob, and it'll show you the value in the display without actually changing it, so you get an idea. With the Modal, you don't have to worry about that because as soon as you change the patch, it's exactly where it is. There is no preset position of the potentiometer because it's not a potentiometer. You just twist it and it just changes it from wherever it actually is. That adds a couple more benefits as well that we'll get to later on in the video. We'll talk about some other features. This synth has 500 patch slots for storing patches. That's not bad. Certainly better than the measly 64 we get in the System 8. Not quite the thousands that we have in the Wave State, but 500 is a decent amount. 300 of those come populated from the factory, so you have 200 empty slots that you can use, or you can overwrite the factory patches if you want. Now this is a virtual analog synth, so there is no analog circuitry in here except for the actual outputs. The filters, the oscillators, everything is entirely digital. But Modal doesn't call it a virtual analog, they call it an extended virtual analog because yes, it has the sine wave and the triangle and square and all the different waveforms you expect, but it also has algorithms that mutate and modify those waveforms in various ways. The Hydrasynth kind of has that as well, where you have the base waveforms and then you can apply mutators after the fact to alter those waveforms. The Cobalt8 instead, it actually has those algorithms as part of the oscillators so that you can have those mangled waveforms or modified waveforms modified by the algorithms before you even ever get to the filters, for instance. And there are 40 of those algorithms in here, so basically 40 different algorithms, and you can morph and play with those as you like. Makes for a very unique and flexible sounding synthesizer. When you do get to the filter, it is a 4-pole morphable ladder filter. You can morph the thing in various ways. As you actually morph it, you can see on the screen what's actually happening. So we have the standard cutoff, resonance, so you can change how the filter is actually responding. And there's a bunch of different filter waveforms you can put in there that modify the sound in really interesting and creative ways. It's not a poly aftertouch keybed, but it does respond to MPE. So if you have, for instance, a Hydrasynth or a Linstrument or a Rolly C board or something that will emit MPE over MIDI, this will listen to that and act upon that MPE It has a reasonably powerful pattern sequencer. They say 512 steps. It's not 512 steps, it's actually 64 steps, but you can have multiple notes per step, so up to 512 notes. You can also record motion sequences, so if they call it animation, you can record cutoff or envelopes or any of these things that you would do to modify the sound. You can actually record that into up to 4 lanes in the sequencer, which is nice because then it gives you your sequence a lot more motion and movement. We have 3 FX slots. They're sequential, so FX1 leads into 2 and into 3. You have up to 11 different FX types that you can use. We've got phasers, flangers, chorus, delays, 1 reverb, and there's up to 6 parameters for each of those effects that you can modify. You have 2 oscillator groups, oscillator A and oscillator B. Each can have up to 4 separate voices, and then you can mix between those two the crossfade between oscillator A and oscillator B. And each of those oscillators has its own waveforms and algorithms and configurations for those algorithms. Some of those algorithms will give you FM as well, so this is actually a very capable FM synth. There are 3 LFOs. LFO 1 and 2 are polyphonic. LFO 3 is global for everything. You can assign those to whatever you want. And how you actually assign those, it has a 12-slot mod matrix. 4 of those are actually hard-coded at the factory for very common things that you would probably do anyway. So that means you have only 8 mod matrix slots left for your sound design. I kind of wish it had more than 8, but 8's not bad. You can do an awful lot with 8. Each of those mod matrix slots has only a single source and a single destination, so you can't have multiple destinations on your mod matrix slots. So that's a limitation, but it does make it a little bit easier to get your head around sound design on this. It has a 32-step programmable arpeggiator. I love the arpeggiator in this thing. Unlike a lot of arpeggiators where you just get up and down and it just plays the notes that you're holding down, this thing you can actually put little sequences in and define your own arpeggios. We'll get into that a little bit later. We have a joystick on here that is spring-loaded for every direction. Obviously this is going to be our bend, and then we have modulation up and down. You can assign this actually to anything you want. We have a tiny little postage stamp OLED screen that all synths seem to have nowadays. I don't know why this is such a huge trend to put these tiny little OLED screens. All the manufacturers seem to do it except for Yamaha. They put nice big LCDs, but this is what we've got to work with. It is context switching, so whatever you touch, whatever control you touch, it instantly switches to show you the values for that. We also have 2 rotary controls on either side. One allows you to select the parameter that we're actually looking at, and then the other one is actually change that parameter, and pushing it in actually selects the parameter. Now virtually all the parameters on these knobs can actually also be changed on the screen as well. So if I wanted to change the attack, I can twist this and change that value, or I can actually change it just by altering the value here. Lots of tactile buttons on here that have a lot of multiple functions. The top line is what the button does if you just push it. The second line in light blue is what happens if you press shift. And then the third line is what happens for this group. So if I hold down ARP button here and press this, it actually uses this third function here that's printed in, I don't know, kind of a lighter blue color. I'm not a huge fan of this kind of interface. Yes, they're trying to cram as much functionality into it as possible, but it means that you have to try to remember, oh, this button is this. Oh, I'm in shift mode, so that button did this instead. Oh, that was something I didn't mean to do. Well, a lot of the time when I'm using this thing, I'll forget that I'm in shift mode and that it is a latching shift, which is nice because then you don't need 2 hands to actually push buttons. So I can just press shift and then push this over here and get the shift function. Or you can just hold it down and use it the same way. It means you also have to remember what mode you're in order to get the correct function when you press the button. It does have DIN MIDI and as well as USB MIDI. We don't have CV or gate, but we do have sync. So if you want to sync this to an old style drum machine that just has a sync line and you want to sync the LFOs, you can do that. It does have an audio in, so you can route that audio in through the FX if you wanted to do that. And the price for this thing, the module $749, the 37 key $849, the 8X that I have here is $949. Just an unbelievably good deal for the amount of synthesizer and capability that you get. especially $949 for a 61 key FETAR keyboard with all the capability this thing gives you, except for some manufacturers that sell synths that have lesser quality components on them and keybeds at inflated prices. Roland. This is really a golden age of synthesizers where we can get something this high quality for that kind of price. Is just unheard of. Let's have a quick look at the back panel. You have headphones out, right, left. Unfortunately, they are not balanced outputs. They're unbalanced outputs. You can plug in an expression pedal, a sustain pedal. There's our audio ins, a 3.5mm jack. Our sync out and in. Here's our DIN MIDI, USB MIDI, and then the power and the switch. It does use a power brick, unfortunately. The thing powers on really fast. You turn it on, it's ready to go in a couple of seconds, and we have a Kensington lock. Then we have Modal's MODALapp application, which is a fantastic sister application that works with Android, iOS, iPad, Windows PCs, Macintosh. It works on everything, and it gives you full access to everything on the synthesizer, including things that you might have to do menu diving for otherwise. It is all in there. It lets you see everything that the synthesizer can do in terms of all the parameters on screen in one interface, which is really useful because it gives you a really good idea of the architecture and what is actually happening. You can bring up a patch, look at the MODALapp, and see how that patch is constructed, and it's real time. So as I adjust the cutoff here, if you look at the MODALapp, the cutoff is changing there. And similarly, if I take my mouse and adjust the cutoff on here, it also adjusts it on the keyboard over here. Basically, MODALapp is a second control panel for the synthesizer, and it's hooked up in real time. It's without a doubt the best application I've ever seen to work with a synthesizer. It has all of your presets in there. When you would edit presets, instead of dialing letters in using this little thing, you can just type it in there. So it's a combination management system, preset management system, second control panel. It's fantastic. Let's have a look at the architecture and how this thing works. Let's start with the LFOs. So we have several different LFOs here. If we go to shift mode, I can show you the different LFO shapes, sine and triangle and so on. Then we have a sample and hold, and then a slewed sample and hold, which is kind of, instead of having jagged edges where it's just switching from one to the next, it actually kind of slews up and down. Now you can't actually modify the slewed sample and hold. It is still kind of random. It just doesn't, it's not as sudden. And then if I put our LFO and then assign it to cutoff, all right, so I've assigned LFO to the cutoff, so we start bringing the depth up, and then the rate. You hear how that actually affects the cutoff. Now if we change the shape, you can hear how that affects the actual LFO itself. Our LFO, we can have a retrigger mode, or retrigger. Every time you hit a key, it starts the LFO cycle over. Free, it just runs, it doesn't interact, it's running all the time. And a single means it just runs once per key press. Nice. LFO 1 controls here, LFO 2 and 3 controls here. We can switch between LFO and LFO 2 and 3 by hitting the shift button. And on the LFO, because all these rotary controllers are bipolar, so they can go down below zero, they usually have different functions when you bring them down below zero. So for instance, the rate is obviously faster, but if I bring it down to zero and then keep going, now we get the synced rates. So now we can sync our LFO to the overall BPM. So here we've got a half bar BPM, or a half note BPM, a quarter dotted note, and so on. Same thing for the depth. We have the depth here, but we can also make it inverted by just keep turning it backwards, and now our LFO phase is inverted. Oscillators. Now this is the real heart of this machine. We have two algorithms, algorithm 1 and algorithm 2. Let's have a look at algorithm 1 first. So you can see we have standard sweep, sines, lots and lots of 40 different algorithms in there we can pick from. So let's go with a sawtooth. Now each of these algorithms that we pick has parameters that we can change that are applicable to that algorithm. So some algorithms might have spread, some might not. So the parameters for each algorithm are curated for that algorithm by Modal. So they've decided, okay, for this algorithm, here's the settings that most make sense for you to actually modify that. So instead of having 64 different parameters that are just overwhelming for every single waveform, they've picked the few that work best for that. And you'll find that throughout this synth, where they do a lot of curating to make things simpler. They've taken the time to work out what actually works best for whatever part of the sound you're working on. And it gives you a great sound faster without limiting you, because there's still lots of things that you can do to actually alter the sound. So for instance, on this sound, we have parameter 1, which is weight, parameter 2, which is spread. Now spread is not going to do anything because our weight is at 0, so let's turn the weight up. So we'll hear. On this one, the spread starts adding voices, and those voices get detuned off the main frequency. And when you get higher, it's above 64, it starts spreading them using harmonic notes. So they know that beyond 64, the actual detuning doesn't sound so musical anymore. So instead, they start actually jumping to harmonic intervals that gives you a pleasant sound. And you can adjust how much depth of that effect is going in there. Of course, in shift mode, we can adjust the coarse and fine tuning for each. Now, as I mentioned, there's 2 oscillators on here. We have algorithm 1 and algorithm 2. They're identical. However, you can set them up to be completely different and just layer them in, and then you can mix between the two with this crossfader right here. And of course, the crossfader is also a mod matrix destination, so if you wanted to, you could have an LFO set up to modulate between the 2 oscillators to give you a lot more motion in the sound that you're creating. So if I set up oscillator 2 with a sine wave, and oscillator 1 is still on our spread, we can hear the difference. You can set up very complex waveforms in there with different harmonics and then have it modulate back and forth and so on. Lots of algorithms beyond the very simple traditional virtual analog waveforms have way more different parameters. Here's an FM triangle square. So we can get very traditional FM sounds in there as well. And of course, these oscillator parameters are destinations for your mod matrix. So if you wanted to have an LFO, for instance, set up to modulate this here, we can do that. So for instance, we could set that up to LFOs modifying your FM on here, and then maybe the joystick is modifying some other parameter on here. So it allows, and then maybe aftertouch is modifying something else. So you can make the sounds have a lot of movement very easily and quickly. Sound design on this thing, once you get your head around how it works, is really simple and fast. We also have a glide function in here, so that if you have a positive glide value, you get a glide, and if we do a negative glide value, it's just legato. It only happens if you actually play legato. Now you have to have a mono in order for that to happen. And so you can change how quickly that slide actually happens. We can alter the drift, so we can kind of emulate an analog synth that's not so perfect, so we can change the phase and tuning of individual voices that are sounding. Give you kind of a more analog or organic effect. We can also change the width of the voice. that separates the individual voices left and right. It gives you more of a stereo effect. Of course, we have the standard octave and transpose. If we hold down transpose and then hit E, now we're transposed up a major third. So if we hit C, we actually get a third ahead. Simple way, if you've learned something one way and your band says, oh, we are going up a step, instead of relearning it for that, all you got to do is just transpose up a note. Chord mode, if we hold down the chord button, play a chord. Now every time you press one note, it's going to play that chord. Mono means monophonic, no polyphonic. Same thing for poly, back to polyphonic. Unison plays all the voices at once. Well, not necessarily all. For instance, you can have unison 4, playing 4 voices, 8 voices. So for now it's on 8. Every note I play, all 8 voices play. Stack, same thing. I can stack 2 voices per oscillator. Now it's kind of like unison, but polyphonic, limited polyphonic. So with stack 2, I have 4 voices. So I can play a 4-note chord. I can't play 5. Once I do, it steals the first note because I only have 2. Same thing, I can go to 4 now. I only have 2-note polyphony. And I get voice stealing after 2 notes. I do have a sustain pedal plugged in here, and you can see when I press it, it lights up this, so it gives you basic sustain. You can also do the same thing by pressing this velocity button down and sustain, which now locks it on. The filter. As I mentioned, we have a number of different filters we can use in here. First off, we have the basic filter comes with. Start with a basic cutoff. You can add some resonance to that. And we can also morph that filter. So now we have a huge resonant spike with a low cut as well as a high cut. So we have basically a bandpass filter there. And we can change the slope of the top end of the filter, bringing that low pass, or allowing the low to come through. However, we have more filters we can actually access if we hold down. Now this is one of these secret things that you're not going to know about until you actually read the manual, but if you hold down patch and then turn cutoff, we can change the actual filter type that we're using. So if we want a balanced phase filter, now you can see we have this type of filter. And of course we can morph that as well. And each of the different filters morphs in a different way. So if we change to, say, balanced high pass, you can see how this one morphs. And there are how many filters? 1, 2, 3, 4 different filter types that we can actually utilize in here. And all the filter parameters can also be destination of your mod matrix. The envelope generator. We have filter envelope, amplitude envelope, and mod envelope. So let's go to our filter envelope. And we'll set up a nice little so you can hear our filter envelope taking effect there. We can also change the depth of it. And it's bipolar, so if we want to, we can make it negative. And of course, once you do that, then the screen will actually show that you are now affecting it in a negative manner rather than a positive manner. We can also change the curves of the filters, so if we want exponential curves, snappy, soft, linear, and if you look at the MODALapp, it'll actually show you these filters right on the screen. So you can change the envelope curve of any of these filters. So there's a description in the manual of what these are. You get a fast envelope. It's the curve, so instead of a straight line down the line, it can actually change the curve of it. We can modify all 3 of these filters together if we want. If you push down, and the manual is wrong about this, by the way, I had to figure this out myself. If we just push down the filter and amplitude envelopes till they all light up, now all 3 envelopes are being modified together. You see it says all envelopes. Normally it'll just show A or F or M for mod, as tells you which envelope you're actually modifying. Okay, FX. The FX on this are usable. They're definitely not the greatest effects I've ever heard on a synth. We have sequential routing. We have 3 slots that we can have the 3 different effects in. Anything that you put into FX1 then gets routed. The output of that effects gets routed to 2, and so on to 3. So it is sequential. You don't have parallel effects. We have available to us chorus, phaser, positive, negative flanger, tremolo, a lo-fi, which is like a bit crusher, rotary effect, a stereo delay, ping pong delay, crossover delay, reverb. You can only have one type of delay, and then you can't set up 2 effects with 2 different delays. You can only have one of each type. So if I set up FX1 with reverb, I can't put a second reverb in FX2. So let's have a listen to the different effects. We'll set up FX1, and we're going to put a reverb in there. Surprisingly, the reverb is mono. Even if you send stereo signals into it, for instance, if I have my oscillator width set up, let's crank that up. So the voices are altering left and right in the stereo field. The reverb behind them is still mono. In these days of DSPs like the Summit here, which has the most gorgeous stereo reverb I've ever heard on a synth, having your reverb be mono is disappointing. So I'm kind of let down by the reverb in this. I don't think I would probably end up using it. I think I'd end up just recording it dry and adding a reverb in my DAW after the fact. It is disappointing. You can change the effects type with a knob here, or every time you press it, it actually changes it. Each of the effects has the effects level, as well as up to 6 parameters. So we have 3 knobs here. So we have A, B, C, and then a shift for D, E, F, which is the 6 different parameters. So we have ping pong delay selected. Here's our dry wet mix. The time, bipolar, so we have the actual time here, like the LFO, or we can go backwards and go into a sync, like an 8th note sync. We have our feedback, so we can add more feedback to it. Go to shift mode, we've got low pass filter, high pass filter, and then a width reduction. So if you don't want it so wide for this ping pong delay. Like I said, each effect has a different set of parameters that apply to that effect. Again, curated parameters that Modal has selected for you that are the best for that type of effect that we're actually using. And if you don't want an effect, you can just hold the button down and it will actually clear it. So we've cleared the effect from that slot. If you set up effects and you have them in the wrong order, you can actually go on the screen here in the menu, you can actually swap them. So if, for instance, you put reverb in slot 1, you realize, oh, actually I wanted that in 3, but I've already got something in 3. Rather than losing 3 and resetting it up, you can just swap them. One of the things that Modal has done that's really smart is set up effects presets. So again, they've curated some great sounding combinations of effects and set them as presets in here. You can see that in the MODALapp. So if you go into the preset manager in the MODALapp and click on FX, you can see we have, looks like 100 slots where we can store presets. And are they all full? They sure are. So what we want to do is press FX 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, 3, holding all 3 down, and now we're in the preset mode. So we can scroll through all the different presets they have. Here's one called slapback delay. Let's load that one. Or how about touch of ambience? Resonating space. That's a really great shortcut to some great sounding effects combinations that are already set up and work really well on a number of different sounds. So instead of creating a sound and then trying to figure out what combination of effects would work well for that sound, you can just scroll through your 100 FX presets in there and come up with something that sounds good for you. Again, makes it much faster to come up with good sounds. All right, the mod matrix. I've talked about the mod matrix several times, and I've actually even shown you me using the mod matrix several times. We have 8 slots and 4 user slots. Most everything can modify everything else, with the exception of stuff can't modify itself. So I can't set up LFO1 to modulate LFO1's depth or rate or something. I could set up LFO2 to modulate LFO1's depth, but you can't have stuff modifying itself. Like I said, there's actually 12 slots, but 4 of them are predefined by Modal. And those predefined ones are key tracking, so it adjusts the filter cutoff based on which note you're playing. So as you play higher, the filter opens up higher. The LFO1 depth to joystick Y positive, which means as I push this joystick up, it adjusts this knob open automatically. Obviously for like a vibrato is typically what that's going to be used for. Aftertouch to cut off, so as I press a key and then push it into aftertouch, you can hear the filter open up. Keybed velocity to amplitude envelope generator depth. So the harder you play, the louder it's going to play. So those are the 4 presets. Now, just because those are presets that you can't change doesn't mean you don't have to live with them. If you want, you can go in and adjust the depth of those 4 presets down to 0, which deactivates them. And then you could set up any of the 8 other mod slots to do something different if you wanted to. Now, it is fairly easy to assign mod slots, and it will do it automatically. So if I say anything that's flashing means it's in mod slot assign mode. So if I say I want to assign aftertouch to, oh, I don't know, well, let's say resonance. Oh, all mod slots full. Okay, let's start with a new inits patch. Okay, so aftertouch we're going to assign to resonance, and we can set the depth. We're going to put it at maximum. And you can hear as I press the aftertouch, now the resonance is affected. Now, if I look at the mod slots, I can actually go through and see mod slot 1 has aftertouch, and it's mapped to filter resonance and the depth. And you can go through all the different ones. You can also clear it if you want. And I can look at all the different ones, see this one's empty and so on. And of course, the easy way of doing this is to use the MODALapp. You can see here's mod slot 1 where I set up the resonance to aftertouch. Okay, so mod slot 2 we are going to set up to, let's see, from, let's say Y minus, and the destination is going to be cutoff. And we'll put a depth of 63 in there as well. So now, just because I've done that on the MODALapp, it's automatically taken effect on here already. So if I move the cutoff, the Y minus, you can hear that cutoff occur. And that's what I just set up in that 1 mod slot in the MODALapp. I find, actually the mod slot assignment is fairly quick and easy in here, and it just picks the next open one. And like you saw, if I have a mod slots all used up, it'll tell you they're full. You can go in and clear individual mod slots, and if you just go to assign something, it'll just pick the next empty one and use that mod slot. Patch management. We have 500 patches in here in banks of 100. We can go into patch mode and start scrolling through them. There is no categorization. All you got is just a blop list of presets. They're in no order whatsoever, and you just got to go through and find the one you like. You just got to guess by what it's called as what it's going to do. There are 300 patches in there from the factory. That gives you 200 slots that you can use for yourself. You can scroll through them like this. You can also press shift and move through the different banks by 100. You also get 8 favorite patches if you hold down the patch button and then press one of these first 8 buttons here. It gives you quick access to your 8 favorite patches. To save a patch to one of those slots, you hold down patch and then press and hold, and it writes it into that quick slot, one of those 8 slots. You can actually go onto the patch manager within the MODALapp, and you can see all those patches in there. You can rename them, you can change them, you can save them out, load them back in. You can see different banks. Honestly, I don't use the patch manager in here to actually name patches like that. It's painful to dial little letters. Just go into your MODALapp and just type it in. It's so much easier. Okay, let's get a nice snappy sound in here. And we'll talk about the Arpeggiator. I really like the Arpeggiator in this synth. So basically, unlike a lot of synths where you just have up and down or up-down patterns and that sort of thing, this Arpeggiator is completely programmable. So what we got to do is just hold down the Arpeggiator key and play what we want it to play. That's it. Now, every time we press a key down, the one thing that I don't like is that you can't save the arpeggiators. There's no way to actually save them anywhere. So every time you want to use an arpeggiator like that, you actually have to play it in each time you're going to use it. And if you want, you can actually put rests in there as well. You can see an arpeggiator rest there. So if we'll kill that arpeggio and do another one. So I can go 1, rest, rest. And now let's play it. So that's kind of cool. Not a lot of arpeggiators allow you to do a rest like that. And you can have up to, I think it's 64 steps. I may be wrong on that. I forget what it was. I think it's up to 64 step arpeggiator. So it's almost like a little sequencer there, except it transposes it. And you can obviously play chords, in which place it does all kinds of, like let's put a single note arpeggiator in there. You can hear what it does. It actually will go through your arpeggiator and utilize the chord that you play. When you play an arpeggio like that, it will actually listen to what order you're pressing the keys. So you can modify the arpeggiator that way as well. We do have some controls for the arpeggiator. We can change the speed of the arpeggiator in division there. And of course that's the internal BPM or MIDI clock that it's external if it's coming in. So there's different modes that you can set up that will play the arpeggiator in different ways. I'm not going to, there's quite a few of them in there. So you can make it go forward, backward, different numbers of octaves. It's very flexible in that way. If we hold down arpeggiator and change our arpeggiator values, we get swing. And you can do that negative as well. Nice. If you want to latch that, you can use your sustain as well. Or use your sustain pedal. All right, the pattern sequencer is quite useful in this. It's not a massive full-featured sequencer like you'd find in a workstation, but it's definitely a usable sequencer. It has some unique features that make it fun. It's 64-step sequencer. You can have up to 8 notes per step in the sequencer. You can save sequences. If there's 100 slots, you can save those into the synth. And of course, you can use the MODALapp to name those or modify them or whatever you want. You can link sequences with individual patches so that when you have a patch loaded, it loads the associated sequence with it, all ready to go. All you got to do is hit play. You have 64 steps and you can have up to 8 notes sounding per step. So you can have all 8 voices sounding differently on every step of that 64-step sequence. On top of that, you have 4 lanes of motion control, and that is things like cutoff or any of the things that you could set up as a destination for your mod matrix. You can record as animated lanes inside the sequence. So you can, for instance, if you set up a 32-step sequence of playing something and then you record on top of it, you move the cutoff knob, it'll actually record that. So let's actually try that. So I'm going to clear out whatever sequence is in there now. We'll press and hold down mute. We've cleared that, and I'm going to record something. Okay, so we can overdub record on that, or we can record some cutoff. As you can see, as I do it, it's assigning it to different lanes. As I select things and start moving it, it assigns it to an open lane until you've run out of those 4 lanes, at which case you have to either clear them, which you can do by shift animated 1. Now I've cleared out animation lane 1, and you can do the same thing with the other 4. And so you can experiment and play with that. You can clear those lanes separately from the actual notes. And that allows you to give some motion and feel to the sequences to make them not so computer and machine-like. And of course, we can play with the tempo, we can play with the length, how long the actual sequence is in terms of bars, and you can also adjust the quantization. So if I play terribly, you can actually have it quantize it to the nearest 8th note or 16th note or what have you. You can also enter it in as a step. So if we adjust the step sequencer, and I haven't actually figured out how you can do that with a key press. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll over the menu to my sequencer, and we will change it to mode from real time to step sequencer. So now I'm going to erase That's not how you do that. You press it here to erase the sequencer. And so now I'm going to record, and you can see I'm in step mode, so it's showing me 8 notes. So I will play, let's play a chord. So that was our first step. Second step, it's going to be, and we're going to throw some filter cutoff in there as well on step 2. And then step 3, we will do these. And step 4, that. Okay, so now we can just stop recording that and play it. So you can enter your sequence both either just playing it to your metronome, and that metronome you can turn on and off, or you can step by step enter your sequence, which is generally how I do it, because otherwise I end up playing it and it's wrong and I have to go back and do it over and over and over again. And you can actually go in here and edit individual steps, whether you record it in real time or step mode. If you hit a key wrong, you go in and delete or add a note or change a note for that individual step, which is kind of a nice feature. MODALapp as well, in the sequencer, you can go in and edit individual sequences with you can edit all the different steps and parameters for each. Unfortunately, the sequencer editor in MODALapp doesn't appear to edit the actual live sequence that you're creating on the synth. So if I play something in, I can't then turn around and edit it in MODALapp. I actually have to save it to a preset first, and then I can go to the MODALapp and edit that preset, save the preset, load the preset back up. I don't know if that's a limitation of the synth or the app, or maybe it's something that I am not doing right, but I haven't figured out a way of actually editing live sequences in MODALapp, which is a shame, because it would be so much easier to do editing in the app than it is right on the keyboard. Okay, so I'm going to go into, instead of patch mode, I'm going to go into sequence mode, and we'll find a sequence that we want, and we'll load that. And now if I play it, okay, so I'm going to erase that, and now we will record, and okay, that's going to be terrible, but let's just... All right, so now that I've recorded that sequence, I can play it back, that horrible sequence I just recorded. And now I can, by holding down ARP and pressing sequence loop at the beginning of the loop and let go at the end of the loop, you'll hear what happens. It will just loop over that section of the sequence over and over and over again until I turn it off. And the same thing with hold. I can press it and hold it at one place in the sequence, which is kind of a neat performance thing. The sequence hold, unfortunately, when you let go of it, it just picks up from where it left off. It would be nice if it just jumped ahead to where it would have been if it would continue playing, so you don't lose the time if you were playing along with a band or something. System settings. We can go into the menu here. Oops. Into all the different settings here. You can, I mean, the menu, like I said, the menu can do anything that that any of the controls can, but I can go into the sequence settings, general settings. Let's look at all the different general settings. All this stuff is nice, but it's way easier to do in the MODALapp. If I go over into the MODALapp, you can see settings here. All of my settings are here. I can change anything I want. It's all right there in front of me. Let's listen to a quick track that I made using just this synthesizer, and then we'll talk about likes and dislikes. things I like, the sound. The sound of this thing it's honestly, it's what sold me on this synth. I walked into Sweetwater. I had no intention of ever buying one of these. I started playing it. I just went through some of the presets, and then I started playing with some of the oscillators and things, and just the sound that came out of this totally sold me. Yes, the Keybed is gorgeous, and the controls are nice, but the sound just, I love the sound. There's some really cool features unique to the modal synths that really I've never seen anywhere else that make it fun to play. Chord inversions. It's got built-in chord inversions. So if I let me just play a chord here and just sustain it. If I hold down patch and turn drift, you can adjust all the intervals. It'll actually invert the chord and move it around. So now I've got this even 2-3 setup. So even though I play a C major, you can hear it's playing an inversion with octaves way up high. And that only actually takes effect when you play chords. So if nothing happens, but if I play a chord, it inverts it however you have that inversion set up. That's cool. It's a really cool idea. And if you're just playing along and maybe you are playing some pads like I just was there, and you can't play something where I want, you know, a bass with something way up high, because my other hand's using something else, I could put this octave way up there. And now even though I'm playing down here, it's playing notes way up here that I otherwise wouldn't be able to use because I'd need two hands for this normally. So instead I can have this hand doing something else, and here I'm playing all these notes. That's a really cool feature. I really like it. Like I mentioned, that programmable arpeggiator, love it. Including rests, really cool, really simple way of setting it up. It works really well. The MODALapp, I mean, what can I say? The MODALapp is fantastic. There's also a VST version that you can actually load in your DAW, so you can modify the synth from within the DAW and save the parameters as part of your project. Just wonderful. Why don't other manufacturers make things like MODALapp for their synths? Other synthesizer manufacturers should look to Modal and emulate their MODALapp. Seriously, it's a fantastic piece of software, and it works perfectly on all these different platforms. The rotary encoders, I really like the use of rotary encoders on the synth. It means you don't have these preset pots that aren't really appropriate for a digital synth like this. It allows you to have bipolar values, positive and negative. Some people have complained the encoders are a little loose. I don't really have a problem with that. They feel great to me. I like using them. I wish maybe the volume and the cutoff knobs, which are big, had a little more resistance because they're obviously the same encoders as the small ones. So, you know, they feel good for the small ones, but for the big knobs, you have a little extra torque because of the larger knob. But other than that, I mean, I really like the encoders. This little joystick I thought I wasn't going to like, but it works really well. It is spring-loaded in both directions, so you can't use it like a mod wheel and just push it and set it. However, you can sort of, because I can push this up and then press velocity XY lock, and now it will lock that virtually as to where it was. So if I press a key and then pitch it down and then press lock, now it locked out and it holds it right there. The Keybed, I've talked about the Keybed. I think this is the best Keybed I've ever played on. It's become my favorite Keybed. Sorry, Hydrosynth, you gotta up your game. I mean, ASM, they make their own Keybed. It's polyphonic aftertouch. It has really great feel, and the polyphonic aftertouch, the way they've integrated it into the Keybed is second to none. But for overall feel, the Modal has it. This Vitar Keybed is just beautiful to play on. The aftertouch is too stiff, just like most synths. That's where ASM has it on over everybody else. So I wish you didn't have to push so hard for the aftertouch. And it is mono aftertouch, so if I press a chord here, one key activates aftertouch for every note being sounded. ASM with their Hydrosynth has pioneered with polyphonic aftertouch. I'm really hoping other manufacturers take their lead and start integrating that into their synth as well. Some dislikes or issues, the tiny print on the panel. I either need really bright lights or I need reading glasses because I can't read this tiny little text on here. And when you have buttons that have multiple functions and you're trying to like, oh, where was that thing? Which one was that? I mean, until you get really, really good at this and really get to know where all the different buttons are, it's tough. In low light, there's just no way you're going to be reading the labels on this keyboard. And unfortunately, the same thing goes for the MODALapp. They've kind of brought that form over function to the MODALapp where they've used the tiny font in there, and they've also brought across the abbreviations. So, Anim1 instead of Animation1. I mean, there's no reason for it because on the MODALapp, you've got all the space in the world. It's an app, so you can just, it's not like you're cramming things in next to buttons. So I wish they would use a larger font in the MODALapp for us older guys who eyes aren't, we don't have 20-year-old eyes anymore. I know I've harped on this multiple times for multiple synths, but having multiple shift functions, yes, okay, you can cram more functionality into less buttons so you keep the cost down, but especially when you get like double and triple functions for buttons like these. Okay, so this is a play, but if you hit shift, it's animate to, but if you hit this, then it's arp rest. Okay, yes, it's, after a while you'll probably get used to it, but I really hate shift functions. At least as far as some other synths where the shift functions are totally obscure, they're not marked, you just have to memorize them, like the SH01 Gaia over here. That thing's impossible. You need a cheat sheet next to you to remember what all the shift functions are, because is it shift and this button or enter in that button, and they all do different things, and none of them are marked, and there's no way of knowing other than memorizing it, which is just stupid. At least on the Modal, they've got everything listed. I know that if I press shift, it's going to, the shift is blue, so it means that it's going to operate these blue functions. At least they've done that, so that's nice. But again, if it's dark light, I'm not going to know that. I'm going to have to do it by feel. I do like that they have a sticky shift button. So because, maybe I'm doing shift and I want to operate this knob. Like if I only have one hand free, I can't do this and then turn that knob. So it is sticky. I can turn it on, adjust the knob, turn it off. Or if you want, you can just hold the shift button, do the function, and let go, and it doesn't stick. So that's kind of nice. And like I said with the SH01, there are hidden shift functions. There are also hidden shift functions in here with things that you wouldn't otherwise know. There's actually 6 pages in the manual describing functions that you would never know from looking at this. Yes, you can get to them if you scroll through the menu long enough. You can do some menu diving. But for instance, one, if I hold down patch and turn drift, that changes that chord inversion. There is nothing on here that says anything about chord inversions. The only way you'd never know that that function even exists is if you happen to come across it in the menu, or you read the manual that says hold down patch and press the drift knob and you get chord inversions. There are quite a few of those hidden shift functions that you're just going to have to memorize, unfortunately. And this is more of a technical limitation than anything else. The MODALapp requires you to use the USB MIDI. If you use the MODALapp in your DAW as a VST, it grabs the MIDI port to use to communicate it with, which means your DAW cannot communicate with your synth over MIDI because only one of them can actually grab that device. So yes, you can put that VST3 MODALapp in your DAW and save presets and do all that stuff, great stuff with your synth, but it also means that you can't send or receive MIDI from the synth. So the only way around that is to hook up USB to your computer for the MODALapp and hook up the DIN MIDI to the synthesizer to your computer so that the DAW can actually send and receive MIDI over the DIN. That case, you can actually run MODALapp and MIDI at the same time, and that's what I'm going to end up doing with this one because it's a limitation that otherwise using the MODALapp in your DAW is a non-starter because you can't actually access the synths from the DAW otherwise. It would be really nice if that could also route MIDI to and from the actual synth, so then you could just address that as a virtual synth in your DAW and it would actually operate MIDI in the synth. That would be wonderful. ARP patterns don't get saved. There's no presets for ARPs. It would be nice if you came up with a really clever ARP that you could save that. I mean, they're not hard to enter in. You just press the keys in, but it would be nice if you had a few slots to save ARPs. The audio output on this synth is probably the lowest level of every synth I own. I've seen lots of complaints online about it. In fact, I have the volume up on all the way on this for all the time, which I can't, none of my other synths I ever do that. So the volume's up all the way, and sometimes even then it's not loud enough for me to get a good level. I don't want to crank the gain up on my preamp and my mixer, because then it also brings up a bunch of noise. So I end up going into the patches and cranking the levels up on the individual oscillators, and then sometimes you have to adjust the effects and things just because the output of the synth is too low. I do wish that we had just a little bit higher, hotter output at the analog stage. And related to that, the outputs are unbalanced. Most of my other synths are balanced. I run balanced cables to my preamp mixer. That way I don't pick up environmental noise. Here, not only do I have unbalanced cables running, I have to have the gain cranked up on the preamp because of the lower output from the synth, which then makes the noise problem even worse. So any noise picked up by the cables gets amplified because I have to have the gain up so high. So again, having balanced cables and a hotter output would solve both of those problems. The mono reverb, I mean, I get it. Reverb is computationally expensive. It takes a lot of processing power to do reverb with all the convolutions and reflections and so on. And having that do it in stereo rather than mono doubles or more the amount of computational power in order to calculate those reverbs. So yes, they only have a certain amount of DSP power to actually run this thing, so that was probably a design decision made early on. I do wish it had stereo reverb. The mono reverb sounds kind of metallic. It is mono. As a result, it's something I probably wouldn't use. I'll end up using my DAW reverb instead. And the patch organization. I wish it had some kind of categorization for the patches, especially when you get into a synth like this that can have hundreds of patches and they're just in there, splattered in any order, and the only way you can tell what they are is by whatever name the designer gave it. It makes it really hard. I mean, you end up having to go through hundreds of patches just trying to find something you like. Obviously, if you aren't using factory patches, who cares? You can wipe them out. You can use your own naming system if you want. I mean, even something as simple as what we have on the Summit, where it has categories. So you have bass, pad, lead, whatever. So you can have a category assigned to each patch, and you can filter those. So if I want, like I wanted a pluck sound, so I could be able to just go to category pluck, scroll through all the plucks. That would be fantastic. The synths that allow you to have thousands of patches, like the Wave State, or hundreds like the Summit, all do that. They all have a categorization function so that you can quickly find patches. I wish this one did too. Conclusion, they've gone to a lot of work to make things easier. Like the 4 preset mod slots. So every time you go to make a sound, you don't have to set up those 4 mod slots that are commonly used on every sound, because they're already right there. That's nice. Having the parameters curated for each, the oscillator and effects, Modal has taken the time to figure out which parameters work best for each of those things and give you only those options as parameters. Some people may say, oh, I want to have every option, every parameter, but then you end up adjusting 64 parameters every time you change something, and having only 2 or 4 or 6 or whatever parameters that you can change for a specific item, and having those be the most effective, best parameters that are usable for that item really makes sense and really makes it fast and fun to do sound design on this synth. When I first got this synth, I wasn't getting it, and I was getting kind of lost because all the controls look the same and you have to read the letters, and yes, I like the sounds, but I wasn't jiving with it at first. But once I got my head around how Modal does things, and how the curation, how they've got the control set up, I really started to like it, and I find that I'm very fast doing sound design. I can come up with a sound in my head, and I can make it fast, and it will sound good. To me, that's always a sign of a well-designed synth. And of course, with the MODALapp, that makes sound design even faster. Once you have everything right in front of you and you can adjust every parameter just by taking your mouse on it and sliding it around, and it instantly takes effect. I mean, literally, you can play a chord on here, hold it down, and adjust a parameter in the MODALapp, and it will change the sound as you're listening to it. So it's like a second control panel. Fantastic application. And last, the sound. I mean, that's when it comes down to it, who cares about everything else? If it doesn't sound good, it doesn't matter. So the sound of this thing is fantastic. it's what made me buy it in the first place. Well, that's the end of episode 6. I hope you like what you saw and heard. If you're lusting after one of these things, I hope you've gotten enough information to make an informed decision as to whether you want to buy one of these for yourself. If you do like what you saw here, don't forget to click like, subscribe, and click that little bell down below. It really helps us out. It lets you know when we release a new video so you don't miss one of these fantastic videos. And please leave a comment down below what you thought about this video. Things we could do better, things you thought were terrible, things you thought were great. I definitely read all the comments. I try to answer every one of them. All right, which synth do you think is going to be next? It's coming up soon. Thanks for watching.